Hello folks, welcome back to the W Club Decanted. I'm your host Luke Holland. On this episode, the third part of our mini-series on the Macallan, we are joined by Rebecca Grant, Head of Maturation. In this chat with Bex, we discuss the Macallan's acorn-to-glass philosophy, the art of sherry maturation, and why her role is so important to the production of the Macallan. As always, you've got two jobs to do. One is to tell a friend on the internet how much you like the podcast. The second is to enjoy the show.
Thank you so much for coming on the W Club Decanted. It's great to have you here. So you're head of maturation at the Macallan. It sounds like quite a prestigious title. Could you tell us first, before we jump into the rest of the questions, your own life and career in the industry before joining the Macallan? When did you join, and what did you do beforehand?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. So I joined the Macallan in 2018, so that was right the year that we unveiled the new distillery here. And prior to that, I had a very scientific background, so my role now is very operational based. But previously I worked in the industry in a more scientific background, managing research labs and analytical labs. And even before that, I actually worked in Scottish Water and Public Health, analysing samples again, so very scientific. And then when I came to Macallan, far more operational based.
Yeah. So what for someone who's got a title like head of maturation, what's a day in the life like at the Macallan?
Well, no 2 days are the same. I'll say that. I've got a very large team. My team is 102 at the moment. So wow. At the Macallan estate, we look after all things warehousing operations. So that's filling casks with new make spirit and putting them into warehouse, taking them out for bottling operations, and then all the wonderful sampling and cask integrity checks that happen in between. I also then have my wonderful cooperage team who are making sure that we're looking after our casks and really having a sustainable cask life cycle.
In terms of that sustainable cask life cycle, is it acorn-to-glass is the phrase I've heard. So you control a lot of the process from the trees growing themselves to the final bottling. Can you explain that to the listeners in terms of what that involves?
Gosh, acorn-to-glass. So I mean that is an awful long process, I guess. It all starts obviously in terms of identifying the oak trees, and whether that's in northern Spain, southern France, or equally out in the US, depending if it's American oak or European oak. Of course, then the trees will get felled. They will be dried, and during that drying process, they will also be transported to Jerez in the south of Spain. And of course, that's where we've got a lot of ownership and partnership now with cooperages and vineyards in the Vegas. And at that point, that's where the casks are then crafted and manufactured, seasoned, and then eventually come over to us in Scotland, where we then fill them with new make spirit. And that part of the journey takes 5 years. And at that point is when we put it in the warehouse. And then, of course, we've got all this wonderful activity going on around sampling and the quality process and checks before then bottling.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and they say that 80% of the flavour is coming from the cask. So that must be a lot of pressure carrying the whole Macallan on your backs as a maturation team. What's that? In terms of, it must be huge in terms of planning out, mapping releases down the line, and kind of quality control management or wood management. It's 102 people. Did you say it's a huge operation?
And 102 people. So that is my team based here at the estate. Of course, if we're talking about the cask supply chain and everybody involved, that's even more people. And of course, we're then extending back into Spain and into the US. But as you say, we do believe that 80% of the character and flavour comes from the cask, and of course 100% of the colour comes from the cask for the Macallan. We don't add anything.
Yeah, all natural colouring. And you mentioned the coopers there. So the coopers are all employed by the Macallan or Edrington, or do you use any third parties in terms of casks in that, or is it all in-house?
So we're obviously now in the place where we've invested heavily in our Spanish operations, and we continue to sort of build that base in Jerez, which is obviously extremely important to our story in terms of our sherry seasoning. So, we have a cooperage based here at the estate. We have cooperages that we own or in partnerships with and work with out in Spain. And as you say, that control is very important from a quality perspective. We want to make sure that our casks are crafted to the demanding specifications that the Macallan whisky makers demand. And that control involves making sure that we're on top of that process, we're involved in that process, and that we have the right people with the right skill set involved.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned a couple of times there sherry seasoning, which is also what you say on the bottles. I believe the sherry seasoned oak, compared to some other brands that would just say sherry cask whiskey or name the type of sherry. Obviously, can you explain maybe to people who maybe aren't familiar watching in terms of what's the difference between you saying sherry seasoned and someone else talking about sherry casks? There's obviously within sherry you've got transportation casks, you've got Solero casks, and you've got the sherry seasoned casks that we're using so for the listeners, could you explain how that works?
I guess what I can talk to is our process. In terms of sherry seasoning, it means that our casks that are crafted either from American oak or European oak are seasoned with carefully selected sherry for a minimum of 12 months in our bodegas in Jerez, right within that sherry triangle, and then at that point, that is when they then get shipped to Scotland and refill them with new make spirit.
Yeah.
And our partnership with Valdespino now, which is one of the oldest and most well-known sherry houses is within Jerez, that's hugely important. That expertise and experience when it comes to sherry mastery is really going to push and drive us forward and be able to innovate and experiment and equally balance that sort of that science and art and craft together.
Yeah, and I mean with the brand turning to over 200 years now, 201 years of the Macallan, going back to your kind of history into present day in terms of that focus on sherry and kind of cask control, do you kind of is there a longer lineage to that? Is there a story? I know there's your connections to sort of decide to be very sherry focused brand, go back into the 1800s. Is that something in your role you're very conscious of, that kind of history relationship with cask maturation?
Absolutely. I mean, the sherry story, I mean, that's a huge part of the Macallan. That's who we are. To your point, that is absolutely our history, our heritage, and it's equally our legacy, and that's what we want to make sure that we have a sustainable supply of sherry seasoned casks for years and years to come. Hence the investments and the partnerships in Jerez with sawmills, cooperages, bodegas, and vineyards.
Yeah, because obviously, I say obviously, but obviously 100 years ago, people drank in the United Kingdom and Northern Europe drank a lot more sherry than they do now. So that obviously birthed the relationship between Scotch whisky and sherry. I imagine there's a lot of people out there who would be more familiar with the sherry whisky than they would an actual glass of sherry outside of maybe using it in the kitchen. So yeah, it's interesting that I think very laudable for the brand that you've made that decision to invest back into Spain to keep that industry alive, ensure that you have that cask supply going in the long term. So that's very interesting. Did you get out there much yourself?
I do, and I love it when I'm out there. I think this is the thing, we have several teams, across Edrington looking after cask, but we're one team when it comes to cask supply, and it's really important that we keep that close connection and work really closely with each other. And I really think that connection then lends itself to, as you say, the sort of acorn to glass and that traceability of the end-to-end process. We know exactly what forests our oak trees have come from, and the minute that cask is then manufactured, it has a cask tracking label assigned to it, so we map the life cycle of that cask all the way from start to finish, and that's hugely important.
Yeah, and you mentioned Edrington as a group there. Do you work with other brands within the in terms of your role in maturation, like with Glenrothes or Highland Park or anything else? Do you kind of exchange ideas or casks, or how does that work internally?
I mean, we absolutely share ideas. I mean, at the end of the day, as you rightly called out, we're Edrington. We're all brands of Edrington, and the Glenrothes is only 3 miles away from the Macallan, and still within Speyside. So absolutely, we've got huge links with each other, and we're in a lot of contact in terms of best practice. Not everything that works for one brand will work for another. We're equally different and have our own unique points as well. But it is really important to share best practice and share ideas. And absolutely, the Macallan cooperage is there to support the requirements and demands of the Macallan brand first and foremost, but absolutely will support our other brands as well.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of because obviously, I say obviously, but what I imagine most brands try and do is you're striving for not just the quality that you've mentioned, but also consistency. The consumer has an idea in their head of what to expect when they drink a Macallan, and you're striving to meet that every time. But do you ever get time to experiment with different cask types, or do any some brands are very kind of like they have their USP of we put it in this cask, a cider cask, or something really random. Do you ever get to that, or is it just about that consistent sherry quality?
There's room for both. I think it's very much it's about both. I said it's that kind of balance between the sort of the art and the science. I mean, what we're talking about is a natural process, a natural product. So within that, there will always be variability, which is where the art comes in, and where the whisky makers, are able to really sort of flex their skills in terms of that mastery when they're creating the liquid. So there's absolutely room for both. Yes, we want to make sure that we're producing the best quality spirit for our core products and what is absolutely identifiable as the Macallan. Mm-hmm. There's always room for a bit of innovation, and that kind of natural variability lends itself nicely. And as I said, we've got lots of very skilled individuals, whether they're based in Scotland or based in Jerez, in terms of sherry knowledge and oak knowledge, and when you combine that, there's always room for innovation.
So I suppose we'll come on to the last bit, Bex, the questions that we ask everyone who comes on. So the first one is your favourite whisky within the Macallan family, and then out with Edrington altogether. What are your two favourites?
So for me, it has to be Sherry Oak 12 Macallan. I mean, it's very distinctively Macallan, and it's so well known and versatile. In terms of out with, I'll be honest, I'm not a massive whisky drinker, so for me it's either the Macallan or nothing, to be perfectly honest. But I think we're here in Speyside, and we're blessed with so many wonderful choices when it comes to whisky. So I love the passion and enthusiasm you see for people, particularly when they come and visit the Speyside area, because they really are spoilt for choice.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And if you were working either in the warehouse or in the lab testing samples, what kind of whisky or what music do you listen to as you're sort of thinking about the Macallan?
So my happy place is definitely 80s rock music. So I think it's probably going to be a little bit of Whitesnake or something like that.
Dancer. There's 80s has come up a lot today, so that's good. And finally, your earliest memory. I know you mentioned you're not a huge whiskey drinker, but your earliest memory of whiskey.
Earliest memory of whiskey. Well, I mean, my dad. Sorry, not my dad. My grandfather and my uncle were distillery operators within Speyside, so whiskey has been a big part of my family life for an awful long time. But I guess my real experience of trying it was when I entered the whiskey industry, so sort of 2014. And then I just, a whole new world opened up for me.
Yeah, marvellous. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast, and I think our listeners will really enjoyed that chat, so thank you.
Thank you for having me.